Hello everyone, welcome to the 10-Minute Sea Discussion podcast, where I, Nora, your host, will break some exciting news from Southeast Asia, a small but fast-growing region in the Asian continent. Now let's stream into our 5th episode, Reclaiming South China Sea. The South China Sea is a large marginal sea body of the Western Pacific Ocean, located mainly in Southeast Asia, with Vietnam to the west, the Philippines to the east, and Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia to the south. It is also bounded by China and Taiwan to the north. Such features of the South China Sea have been taken for granted by most Southeast Asians. However, not just merely those geographical familiarities, but also the narratives behind the ongoing conflict within it, between China as the main drivers and the others. Issues occasionally popping up regarding who owns which matter of the sea have been deemed to be part of the regional life. Or in other words, which countries possess the exact rights and responsibilities to take control of what parts in these vast maritime areas. What has made this region a lucrative property that for so many years surrounding power have tried to take over? Firstly, it serves as a prominent maritime junction, connecting the Pacific and Indian Oceans. More than a third of global shipping routes, including vital energy and trade supplies, cruise through this sea, granting it one of the global busiest and most important sea lanes. Secondly, the region is rich in natural resources, particularly oil and natural gas reserves situated beneath the seabed, as well as abundant fisheries that support the livelihoods of millions across the region. Thirdly, lying at the intersection of multiple countries with overlapping territorial claims, including China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. These disputes are centered around small but strategically located islands and reefs, such as the Spratly and Parasol Islands. Control over these areas provides not only resource access, but also the ability to project military and economic influence across Asia. With those in place, the South China Sea's special location makes it a geopolitical hotspot, a hub for global commerce, and a contested zone for natural resources and strategic dominance. It's still under debate on which event marks the first conflict in this zone, but for the time being, most resources seem to share the common note that the end of the Sino-Japanese War in early 1895 should be the beginning of the 1900s era of this century-long chronicle, primarily comprising several clashes in the South China Sea. The confrontation in 1895 was mainly involved the Japanese Imperial Navy and China, witnessing China's cession of Formosa or Taiwan to Japan. However, in 1945, after Tokyo surrendered, marking the end of the Second World War, China's Kuomintang-led government repeatedly made statements to reclaim its previously ceded territories. Fast forward to 1974. Despite some mild turbulence revolving around gaining and losing islands in the South China Sea, mainly among the US, Japan, and China, this era concluded with 3 main treaties: the Treaty of San Francisco, US-Japan Security Treaty, and Okinawa Reversion Treaty, showing the general exit of Japan and US from the regional dispute. However, the complicated context in the South China Sea has never died down. In fact, tension has been intensified since 1974, with China as a game-changing player, irrationally declaring its power on islands and archipelagos that are officially recognized by other countries. Looking into the timeline of how this issue progressed, it can be acknowledged that China must have built its conspiracy in 1947. Under the ruling nationalist party Kuomintang, China demarcated its claims in the South China Sea with an 11-dash line on the map. That claim encompassed the majority of area, including the Pratas Islands, the Macclesfield Bank, the Parasol and Spratly Islands, which was stated that the country regained them from Japan after World War II. Not until January 19, 1974, did China turn its plan on paper into reality. China military forces set foot on the western side of the Paracel Islands, erecting flags on several islands and seizing a South Vietnamese garrison. This movement of China sparks the nation's first serious attempts on occupying the maritime properties, which were later expanded into unending clashes with other forces outshore, mainly involving two other countries, Vietnam and the Philippines. After roughly a decade of relative calm in the South China Sea, in 1988, Chinese Navy sank 3 Vietnamese fleets, taking the lives of 74 young sailors, aged from 18 to 20. Up to now, this incident is still considered as the most tragic confrontation ever occurred in the South China Sea. Another worth noting event would be Vietnam firmly confronting China's deliberate establishment of oil rigs in contested water zones near the Paracel Islands. Vietnamese forces dispatched naval vessels attempting to stop the Chinese from its provocative act. This encounter quickly escalated as several vessels collided and started to take place, with both sides blaming each other for ramming into their ships. Anti-China protests broke out across Vietnam shortly after that, which was unfortunately utilized by rioters and rebels to vandalize hundreds of businesses thought to be belonging to Chinese owner. If searching through the internet on the South China Sea disputes between Vietnam and China, most results only mention those 2 incidents. However, clashes of small or medium level still emerge occasionally, which deteriorates trust between the two regarding maintaining neutral and constructive postures in the South China Sea. Similar to Vietnam, in 1996, a Philippines Navy gunboat and 3 Chinese naval vessels engaged in a 90-minute battle near Capone's Island in the Mischief Reef, part of the Spratly chain of islands claimed by Manila. This incident kick-started China's sweeping actions with an ASEAN state member apart from Vietnam. Relationships between Manila and Beijing further worsened after the Philippines dispatched a warship to encounter Chinese fishing boats in the Scarborough Shoal, located to the north of the Spratlys. Counter to such offensive moves from the Filipinos, China also sent its own surveillance crew to shelter its fishermen. Since this tense encounter, multifaceted collaboration between the two is nearly never in sight. With a long history of enduring various civil wars and World War II, an intense battle involving mainly the armed forces is never prioritized as the resort to tackle South China Sea dispute in Southeast Asia. Among the first attempts to remediate the heat in the zone was the establishment of the third and final United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, in 1982. UNCLOS showcased resolutions that defined the rights and responsibilities of nations in their actions on surrounding waters, relying on the basis of exclusive economic zones and continental shelves. Likewise, in 2002, China and 10 ASEAN states signed an agreement in Phnom Penh on the ASEAN-China Declaration on the Code of Parties in the South China Sea, seeking to ease the tensions and giving more guidelines for an appropriate stance when it comes to similar issues. Sounding as it may be, the agreement lacked clear binding code of conduct. It did not transparently take in the sovereignty matters linked to the South China Sea, and its vague clauses have hindered it from being a credible law document in solving territorial disputes. What is still remarkable in ASEAN history was the failure to issue a communique at the conclusion of its annual meeting in Cambodia 2012. It reached an impasse over China's claims in the South China Sea, with member countries showing disagreement over whether to include the territorial issue in the joint forum. Given the uncertainty from the international legal system and regional association on dealing with the dispute, Vietnam and the Philippines have to embrace separate approaches dealing with their assertive neighbor, China. The Philippines prefers a more outburst pathway whenever their dispute with China over the South China Sea returns to the spotlight. Several military drills with the U.S. Navy SEALs, one of China's unfavorable counterparts, on a regular basis take place in the contested zones between China and the Philippines. The country even brought this into lawsuit by initiating an international arbitration case under the UN clause over Chinese claims of sovereignty to the Spratly Islands and Scarborough Shoal. It was the first time a nation boldly sued China under the UN clause. What's more, in 2011, to further strengthen its voice, the government of the Philippines decided to refer the South China Sea as the West Philippine Sea in all official statements. This movement even received apparent support from the then U.S. Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, who also started mentioning the South China Sea as the West Philippine Sea in a joint press conference with the Philippines counterpart. Such an act is not just a mere advocate, but also an illustration to China of how tight the relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines is. Robust as it may seem, such philosophy is yet to reverse the tension lying in the middle of South China Sea between China and the Philippines. In contrast, it has deepened distrust from both sides, leaving a big question mark on whether their relationship can be improved. Unlike the Philippines, Vietnam decides to follow a quiet but firm and resilient formula to tackle this complicated circumstance, and it is worth further consideration for large-scale applications in the region. With a long evident history of warfare, which could be dated back to the prehistory era, it further defines their rivalry in the contested waters. While China continuously constructs military bases in formerly uninhabitable reefs belonging to Vietnam, garners global media attention, framing the disputes as a battle, Vietnam stays quiet but firm, asserting its own actions to declare its sovereignty. The country refuses to back down, with Hanoi ramping up its military presence in direct defiance of China's expansive claims, leveraging the multifaceted strategies. Vietnam, on the other hand, modernizes its military power on islands and reefs under its official control. Vietnam's government has made significant initiatives in land reclamation on the Spratly Islands, building up as half of much land as China had during its construction of 7 military bases from 2013 to 2016. Additionally, Hanoi both advances its airstrips and fortifies its outposts equipped with weapons and defensive structures designed to withstand potential attacks. This acceleration highlights Hanoi's effort to bolster the nation's strategic position in South China Sea. On the other hand, the country is enhancing its surveillance by deploying radar systems and maritime patrols to monitor activities in its claimed territory. These attempts illustrate Vietnam's calculated response to China's militarization, showing determination to safeguard its territorial integrity. At its core, this approach displays Vietnam's priorities, balancing regional multilateralism with self-dependence, which has been developed from its unwavering resilience against several strategic adversaries, showcasing national firm determination to protect its homeland and resist unilateral actions. The South China Sea conflict is no longer a breaking story for most news readers in Southeast Asia. In other words, after centuries of clashes on different scales, it can be considered as a geopolitical norm in the region. However, no matter in what areas they are brought up, the dispute, hidden or not, still imposes instability in maritime security in Southeast Asia, which is capable of hindering further potential to a full economic growth in this thriving region. With that threat in place, it is urgent that ASEAN take this issue seriously as a common circumstances that can affect all 10 member states. Though violence must never be implemented, a strategic diplomacy consisting of firm statements given by the shared voice of all countries representing the strength and fraternity as one growing bloc should be put forward. For individual countries experiencing this geopolitical headwind, though it is still advisable that they must take the active stance in interpreting and handling the situations that align with their national ideals and capacities while enforcing a shared effort with ASEAN, maintaining peaceful and calm atmosphere for not only themselves but the Southeast Asian region as a whole should be underscored during any negotiation attempts. Whether there will be a wide way out for all parties involved in this century-long dispute is still inconclusive. Yet, small but firm efforts attributing to strategic communication, generous economic collaboration, and a constructive manner towards multifaceted collaboration still play their roles effectively in cooling down the climate in this world's most disputable zone. So that's the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it and found the news interesting. For your convenient reference to further details of the news I mentioned, please find the links to my blog page in the description, where I have compiled all the related information. If you have any questions, or you want to discuss more on what I shared today, please leave your comments below. I would love to talk to each of you more as well. You can search for more episodes of this 10-minute Sea Discussion podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, and my own blog page. Thank you for listening to today's episode all the way to the end. And I hope to see you again in my next episode of 10-minute Sea Discussion, which will be released soon. Once again, this is Nora, your host. Thank you so much and goodbye.